I'm Bob Ashley. I'm editor of the Herald Sun and have been mostly for the last 7.5 years. Been in journalism for 40-some years, and embarrassingly enough, actually worked with some of the equipment that we have on display here today. One of the things we have here today is what was called a speed graphic camera made by a company called Graphiplex, and it was the workhorse press camera of the 30s and 40s and even into the 50s. It weighed probably about, I'm guessing, 8 to 10 pounds. It was not light to lug around. It operated with a bellows mechanism that you use to focus. And if you've seen any of those 1940s movies of guys with fedoras with crests in their hat, and they were photographers, this is what they were carrying. In its earliest form, you had to load one negative at a time. Every time you took a shot, you pulled out the negative, put it in a box, a dark box, and put in another one. Later, by the time I actually learned to use one in the 60s, they had roll film holders that would hold a roll of film that would take 8 frames per roll. One of our photographers in the paper was at the Democratic National Convention 2 weeks ago in Charlotte and shot 900 frames a day with her digital camera and thought nothing of it. You would never have shot more than 100 would have been a heavy shoot when you were shooting with 8 shots to a roll and changing film. So that's, really for years and years took every picture in the paper. We also have telegraphy material. This is actually way back in the early years of the 20th century still, how newspapers would have gotten national and international news from the Associated Press. It actually came in by telegraph, and an operator would be sending messages out and would be recording the code as it came in and transcribing it in order to get national stories, international stories in the paper. Up until even as late as the 60s and 70s, the person in charge of national and international news at a newspaper was often called the telegraph editor, even though the telegraph had long since ceased to be. So what we get now on our iPhones over the internet instantaneously came in dots and dashes to newspaper offices in the up until, I would think, probably the 20s is when it began automated and come over as teletype machines. And then we've also got the canister that was used to develop film. Film is something people today don't even think about. But of course it's what we used before, and you had to have a special darkroom. We would unload the film from the camera, roll it up on a spool, put it in this canister that would be filled with developing fluid, and that would bring the image out, the negative image out, of course the reverse image out on the film, that you would then have to print onto paper and larger, and then would have to go through a machine that would engrave it on a piece of metal or a piece of plastic that would go on the press and would actually ink up and print the image. I brought along some exposed and unusable 35mm film, which was actually relatively late in film photography, a long way from the single sheet negative, the single negative that I talked about. And then finally, an old Royal upright typewriter. It would have been a fixture on every desk in every newsroom in America in the 40s, maybe even up into the 50s. It's a manual typewriter. It's very heavy. It was made so when you I don't know if you can hear the sound of it or not. But this is that would be what it sounded like. And let's see. It used to have a bell on it that's not working, that when you return the carriage so that you could start typing another line would actually ring out. I didn't bring any because I couldn't find any, but what would have happened is we would have had several sheets of paper in there with carbon paper in between, so you could make multiple copies of the story as you type. You'd keep one copy, you take one copy up to like the city editor, or you might take 2 copies, he'd edit it, he'd send one copy to the composing room where it would be set into type manually on a linotype machine. And so you'd have multiple copies of the same story with carbon paper. There was no delete key, there was no backspace, there was no, let me just cut out those 10 words and replace others. You would strike through, you'd type over, you'd white out, and if you wanted to move something around. Now if you cut, why do we call it cutting and pasting on a computer? Because what you used to do if you had to move paragraphs of the story around is you would cut the paper apart, you'd have a glue pot, and you'd paste them together in a new order. So you'd end up sometimes with 3 feet of copy paper and sort of slices of it pieced together as you rearrange the story. And hence we call it cutting and pasting. it derives from that. The pica pole, we have a metal pole here that's about 18 inches long that was used for measuring type in what are called picas, which were type measurements that you used. It was very handy because it's a very heavy, thin piece of metal that was an excellent straight edge if you wanted to tear a piece of copy paper to rip off a paragraph and move it. It was a very good tool for that. We have a proportion wheel. If you had a picture and it was 8 inches wide and you wanted it to be 4 inches wide in order to fit the space you had, how deep was it going to be? Well, you would simply set one part of your proportion wheel to the size you wanted, and you look down and find out what the size would be in the enlarged or reduced mode, so you could figure out how much room to leave for the photograph to go in. The Herald Sun, in its incarnations as the Durham Morning Herald and the Durham Sun, really we trace our roots to February of 1889. So in 1914, we'll note our 125th anniversary as a newspaper. And that's 125 years of basically communicating the news of what's happening in Durham to the people of Durham. And it's certainly gone through many evolutions over the years. We're not nearly the immediate form of communication we were when people would stand outside of the newspaper office on election night and the returns would be posted on a bulletin board for people to see. That part is gone. But I think for 125 years we have chronicled the day-to-day life of people in Durham. And that's an incredibly important trove. And every one of those newspapers, every single one from issue 1, is preserved on microfilm so that researchers can go back and see the life of the city.
I'm Curtis Booker. I have lived all my life on the Lee Farm, where I'm the 7th generation to live there. And my mother still actually sleeps in the same room every night that she was born in 89 years ago. And so we have lots of the artifacts from the original owners of the farm, my ancestors. And what I have here is R.S. Lee's, Richard Stanford Lee's toolbox, which he used to, it has his name in script on the bottom. And this was his toolbox for his wagon. It's all handmade, and all of the ironwork is hand-forged. He was a carpenter, a blacksmith. He was a planter, had approximately 1,000 acres, and he was a miller, owned a cotton gin, a sawmill, as well as the grist mill, and he owned a store on the plantation, and he was a magistrate. So how he managed to do all that, I have no idea, but he did. And I just brought this because, and I just indicated one thing that he did that we have all the records on. In 1856, he built the bridge that spanned New Hope Creek on Stagecoach Road, which was the original road from Newbern to Hillsborough. And in 1865, the Confederates retreating toward Chapel Hill burned the bridge, and the Federals crossed on the remaining stringers and fought the last skirmish of the war on Stanford Lee's plantation. And so I have many of the tools here that he used, but I also have, and I have an early map showing the location of the mill, the store, and the cotton gin, and the sawmill, and also of his plantation house. But I also have things from his wife, Ann Carlton Lee, representing what she did. There's the mandrel from her spinning wheel, some of the last yarn that she spun there, her keys to the house, and then a very important thing, a small bell. I also have her shuttles with her initials carved on them, A.L. right here. And the bell is interesting, though. It was she was born in 1816 and died July 10th, 1861, and she married Stanford Lee in 1834 and bore him 15 children before she died in childbirth in 1861. And this beautiful little bell, which is brass and has a rosewood handle with an ivory top, sat at her bedside, and she used it to summon help during her lying in and her recovery time from her many pregnancies. And so she managed that. When she died in 1861, and the keys here represent the fact that she was in charge of a huge household with many outbuildings, many of them food storage buildings, and many chests and cupboards and pantries in the house. And she was responsible for feeding approximately 40 people. There were 16 enslaved African Americans on the farm, as well as itinerating teachers for all those children and neighborhood children, and also cobblers and other craftsmen that would stay while they plied their trades. And so she fed approximately 40 people at each meal 3 times a day, so 120 meals a day. And she managed that and managed her household and did all her spinning and sewing and weaving for the family, and produced 15 children, 14 of whom survived her. So that's what we have here today. We operate Patterson's Mill Store on the farm still, and the farm itself, 86 acres plus a 14-acre buffer, so really 100 acres, is now a city park. The second heritage park in Durham. The other one is West Point on the Eno, and Lee Farm is in the south, approximately right at the intersection of I-40 and NC-54. And they hope to have it fully operational in 2013.
Okay, well, I'm Captain Sean Boone with the Durham Fire Department. I've been on for 24 years. I am currently assigned at Station 7 on Duke Street. I actually moved from Western North Carolina. My family moved here when I was 15. So I lived until the last 2 years of high school in the mountains of North Carolina. And then I lived in Durham my last 2 years of high school, and I've been here ever since. I have today a bell that is off a 1902 steamer that Durham still has in its possession. It's in storage, and hopefully one day it'll be at a museum. And I also have a helmet from 1970, and I brought a current helmet that I was just issued last week to show the differences in it. And I have a picture of a fire prevention display at Northgate Mall in Durham in 1975 that had the old steamer, so people can see what it looks like and actually see the picture of the bell, the actual bell. The bell is important because they rang that to get people out of their way. And that steamer was from 1902, so it was well over 100 years ago. There was no sirens or anything like that. So someone would ring this bell, probably the captain would ring it as they went through the streets of Durham. So that's a very important thing. Now we have sirens and air horns, and that's what we warn people to move out of the way to get us through. All right. So the bell is important because it's been replaced with sirens, but it does the same thing. It did the same thing. The clanging of the bell in the early 1900s to a citizen, they knew what it was. They knew a fire truck was coming, a steamer was coming, and they knew to get out of the way. If you were in the middle of the street, you better watch out, because the team of horses pulling that steamer probably wasn't going to slow down very much, like we do on a fire truck today, we can brake a lot easier. So you better watch out for a team of horses that were coming. The helmets are important because it protects us, for number one. And I brought the 2 different helmets because one from 1970 is nothing but plastic. It's kind of like a souped-up construction helmet today. The new helmet is a lot different. It has built-in eye protection. It's made of Kevlar to protect us, and it cost about $250. I don't know what this plastic helmet cost, but it probably wasn't very expensive. So a helmet is something that not only just identifies a firefighter as a firefighter, we wear it for protection. It protects us. We wear it in fires. We wear it on every call we go on. I think it's the same job. The exceptions are the technology's changed it. Our equipment's better than what they had. Their gear, our helmets, our trucks. That's what's changed, but it's the same job. And I'm sure that those guys that 100 years ago in Durham were proud of their job the same way we're proud of our job now and are proud to do it. And you're not going to find many firefighters that say, I'm here for the money, because it's not the highest paying job in the world. But it is a job that you can be proud of and to make a difference in the world and to think, hey, you know, I worked there 30 years. I feel like I did something good. And that's what I find. I guarantee you they thought the same thing. Well, I'm very proud. That's why I'm doing this. I'm interested in the history. I have a website called DurhamFire.net. It shows the Durham Fire Department. Anything you want to know about the Durham Fire Department is on DurhamFire.net. It has pictures, information, everything. And it has a history page. And I actually have a copy of that here, of just the history page, talking about when Durham Fire Department was formed up until currently. So the history means a lot to me. I think it's important to remember who came before you and who sacrificed, and hopefully people after you will remember your generations and what you did or your fellow workers did. So it means a lot to me to be part of Durham. I mean, I've lived here 30 years, so I consider Durham my home, even though I grew up for 15 years in the western part of the state. So there's a lot of pride.